Welcome back, fellow artists. Today, now that we have our portrait drawn out on paper, we are going to begin shading in our portrait with our graphite pencils. You will also need, for this portion of the project, a reliable eraser. The one I have for this video is a kneaded eraser. It is almost like playing with Play-Doh. It shapes into different shapes here, and you can squeeze it to the small point that you need to erase specific things. I have my Prismacolor ebony pencil, but if you do not have this at home, you are more than welcome to use a regular tube wooden pencil or a mechanical pencil for this project. I have my blender, which can be made out of paper, tissue, or paper towels to blend our values, so our darks, our grays, and our lights. And then last but not least, this white charcoal pencil, if you have some bright white highlights in your portrait, would make and take the extra mile on that portrait to really make areas pop. You don't need it, but I really like to use it, especially in areas of dramatic highlight. You'll also need your reference picture, which is the original picture you took, and this is the one I will be looking at as we go along here. I myself am going to start with some of those big areas here where I have my face is in shadow and so is my neck. So as I get started here, I'm going to take my pencil and begin shading some of those kind of dark value areas. I would, instead of making big strokes with the pencil like this, I would go in and make shorter strokes, cover little bits of area here at a time. Otherwise, you're going to end up with streaks from your pencil, even if you use the blender. So try to keep your pencil strokes short and try to keep them even, meaning you don't want to have these scribble lines going through your shaded areas here. You don't want to see visible lines as we're shading along. Now, one of the things I personally do in order to add value with this pencil and not press so hard is, instead of using the tip of my pencil to shade, I use the side of my pencil and I hold my pencil from the back portion here, so I'm not too tempted to press too hard on my pencil as I'm going in to shade. Let's see, this area is a little lighter here. Right under my chin, it gets a little darker because the light isn't quite hitting me at that angle as much. It's right under my chin. Make my face pop out a little more. My hair is going to be a different story. That portion of my hair is pretty dark. Right underneath here, the chin area, not so dark either, so I'm going to start off fairly light with my ebony pencil and shade the area that I drew my shaded parts in. It's a little dark around my lips there as well, right underneath. I'm going to go ahead and keep shading. I'm going to get lighter here because my shadow on this side of the face is not quite as dramatic as it is right underneath my chin area there. It's just slightly darker here, closer to my cheekbone. My eyes, I got a pretty dark shadow here. And then a kind of a medium shadow right here next to my eyeball. There you go. And again, we're using our eyeballs to observe our picture, make sure we're adding those darks where they belong. Once I have a good amount of area covered, I'm going to start using my blender here and a scrap piece of paper so I don't smudge everything on my paper. And in order to make my face and transitions between my values smoother, I'm going to go ahead and start using this blender to really soften up some of my areas here. And as I did with the pencil, I'm covering only a little bit of space. So I'm not going in scribbling the whole thing in, otherwise you're going to end up with some pretty dramatic lines as well. I would cover a little bit of space at a time, little chunks. Every once in a while as well, while you're working with this blender, if you get to an area that's really dark, like a pitch black, and you're blending that area, if you're going to move on to a section of your face that's not quite as dark, I'd go ahead and clean the blender. And what I mean by that is, if you look over on my scrap piece of paper, if I scribble down, you'll see that my blender makes some marks from all the residue it's picking up as I'm blending my pencil marks. So if you are working in a dark section of your face, that will carry over to another portion of your face, especially if it's a lighter place. So make sure you clean off your blender on a scrap piece of paper or something, kind of like scribbling it out, so it's nice and clean for the next try while you are working in your graphite and your blending stick. Now you can already start to see the difference between the blender here near the chin area and where I've simply shaded with a pencil. So you get some pretty nice soft transitions between the blender and the pencil working together on that artwork. I'm going to go in along the chin area here and start blending those darker portions of my values. This is where the light isn't quite hitting me. It's the little shadow portion of my face. And as I'm going along, I notice I may need to make this part of my face, or my body, I'm sorry, just a little darker. So when people look at this, my chin pops out a little more. And again, cover little sections at a time. Don't go and scribble big lines with your blender because you will end up with some pretty dramatic lines as well that way. And they're pretty hard to get rid of, even with an eraser. And there's some more of the transition between the blender and the graphite, really smoothing things over as we go along here. Alrighty, now I'm going to go in and add a light gray halo right under this dark gray here because I don't have a dramatic dark line that simply stops right there. I have a little bit of a light gray halo that follows right along the edge of that shadow. And notice how nicely blended that starts to become as we are adding those details to the face. And like I said, you can always go back and darken some areas up as well if you find that after you blend some of your areas, they aren't as dark as they were before. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm darkening up some of those areas so that part of my face will pop out a little more. There you go. As for the hair here, a lot of my hair does overlap into my face a little bit. So I'm going to go, and we'll say this portion here is actually sticking out quite a bit. I'm going out this way. And from here, this portion of my hair is pretty pitch black, but the entirety of my hair, if you look closely, is not actually just black. There are some really dark grays as highlights, and there's even a couple of areas where the light hits my hair just right, where it's just a very dramatic white highlight. So even if you have dark hair, your hair is not going to be shaded in just one dramatic dark color. When you look at hair, especially in the light hits your hair in different ways to where the highlights are reflected in different manners, and some of your hair is in shadow, so it appears to be darker in other areas. So if you're like me and you have dark hair, or you're looking at a portrait with dark hair, don't just make the entire thing pitch black. Really study that picture and make sure that you're paying attention to where the highlights are placed in your portrait itself. And notice this portion of my hair is indeed pitch black because that part is in shadow, but the rest of it will probably be a pretty dark gray, pretty close to that pitch black color. But again, we're working from observation here, so be sure you're paying attention to your pictures that you're looking at and applying your knowledge of how to add those darks and those lights onto your portrait. Now remember, again, if you have a lot of residue on your picture, don't blow it off. It will just smudge a lot. So make sure you have a trash can nearby and just wiggle your paper, shake it off a little bit, and your residue should come right off with no problem. If you blow on it, it does tend to smudge some of that residue across your paper and leave some unwanted marks. So I would be mindful of that as well as you're going along and creating your own portrait here. But this is about the only thing I have for you is how to get started on this value shading of your portrait. Pay attention to where those darks are placed on your picture. You may print it out if it makes it easier for you, or you may just look on your Chromebook, your phone, or another kind of source to help you out there and looking at the black and white sources. Pay attention to the highlights and pay attention to things of that nature. But here is the beginning of the portrait. Hopefully I can finish this pretty soon, and I'll show you what the finished product looks like and how to add highlights onto your self-portrait if you have a nice white charcoal pencil. That's all I have for you. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you have a wonderful time creating your portrait.